what does it mean to be resilient and vulnerable at the same time? And how could that serve your business community in times of uncertainty? When we come back, we'll be talking to Dr. Paige Williams about becoming anti-fragile and learning to thrive through disruption, challenge, and change. Hi everyone, hope that you are having a morning Cape Town, good morning South Africa and the rest of the world. It's my A very warm welcome. Good morning. If you're just joining us, welcome to the conversation with Brigetti. This stream is made possible by StreamYard and BeLive Media, and I'm your host, Brigetti Limbanda from Cape Town in South Africa. In today's show, we're going to be talking to Dr. Paige Williams about how businesses can become resilient and anti-fragile during a time of disruption, challenge, and change. To know when we're going live, please go ahead and like our Facebook page so you get the notification. And on YouTube, please click the subscribe button and the notification bell. Dr. Paige Williams helps leaders move beyond just the need for resilience so that they can become anti-fragile. She uses positive psychology, neuroscience, and her 20-plus years in business leadership experience to provide practical, evidence-based ways to help leaders and organizations thrive through change. So let's welcome Dr. Paige, shall we? Paige,
hi,
good
Brigetti.
morning.
Hello there. How are you? I'm really well. How are you?
Very well. Slightly disorientating sometimes, when it gets to working across time zones and you way ahead of me.
That's right.
For me.
It's the evening of the day that you're just beginning for me here in Melbourne, Australia. That's right.
Wonderful. I'm going to kick it right off because this is a conversation that I think a lot of people and organizations are interested in. And so I'm going to start off because it's maybe a terminology that a lot of people are not familiar with. Can you tell us what it means to be anti-fragile?
Sure, I'd love to, Brigetti. So the word anti-fragile was first used by an author called Nassim Nicholas Taleb in his book Anti-Fragile. And that was thinking about how political systems and economic systems can thrive through disruption. And I came across Taleb's work in the middle of last year, and because my background is in leadership, having been an organizational leader at the senior levels, and now moving into positive psychology and neuroscience and understanding what helps systems to thrive, human systems, whether that's a system of one as a leader or whether it's a team or whether it's a whole organization. So I was really taken with this idea of anti-fragile because I've been teaching resilience for nearly 15 years now, and I've seen that it's just not enough, that we need something that takes us beyond resilience, and that's exactly what anti-fragile speaks to. So we can think of anti-fragile as a continuum. And so at one end of the continuum is fragility, and we're probably all pretty familiar with the idea of being fragile. If you think of something that's fragile, it might be a vase or it might be a pane of glass, but it's something that cannot withstand the pressure or the stress or the disruption that's going on in its environment. And the same is true for people. When we feel fragile, we feel overwhelmed in some way by what's being asked of us in terms of the context that we're in. And it can mean that we feel that we need to play small, we want to stay safe, and that's when we're feeling fragile. Then if we move up the continuum to the middle, then we might describe that as being robust or resilient. So this is where resilience sits. So let's talk about robust first. So if we're robust, then I use the metaphor as well, like a lighthouse. We can kind of withstand the elements and we are able to not be impacted by them. And if we're resilient, we may be impacted by them, so we may get a knock back, but we're able to bounce back and come back to where we were before. And that's really my issue, if you like, with resilience. It certainly is a very valuable skill, and it's been shown that it is a skill that we can teach and we can learn. But that's an awful lot of energy for us to be bouncing back to where we were before. And as I've been working with leaders and CEOs and senior leadership teams, I've seen that this bouncing back and the energy that it takes to come back to where we were before really isn't moving us forward. And so anti-fragile, as we move up the continuum to become anti-fragile, it means that something actually improves through the experience of disruption, challenge, and change. So there is more upside than downside in contexts that have uncertainty and that have change inherently embedded in them. So there's this improvement process rather than just coming back to normal that's inherent in becoming anti-fragile.
I really like the way that you explain that in simple terms that almost any business person out there can understand. And then how do you differentiate being anti-fragile with resilience? Is there a difference?
So there is, I mean, that there is this idea that, I mean, both of them, let's talk about what they have in common. Both of them can be taught. Both of them are about both a mindset and a set of skills. So they're the things that they have in common. And they both involve learning. And certainly that's very true of resilience as it is of anti-fragile. But really, resilience is a responsive process often. It's because something has happened in our environment and we're having to respond in a resilient way to something that's kind of knocked us back. And anti-fragile, in the way that I describe it in the book, it's an intentional, purposeful process that we're engaged with all the time. So it's really an interactive, dynamic journey that we're on, really, in relation to what's going on in our context. And it's certainly super relevant in organizations and for leaders and teams, but equally we experience disruption and change and challenge in our personal lives as well. So whether that's, you know, a new relationship, a relationship ending, having a baby, various stages of being a parent, there's always something that's moving and changing. And then in organizations, whether that's, you know, a new team member joining, an established team member leaving, a new boss, a reorganization, a change initiative that's going on. So this difference is that actually anti-fragility is something that we are constantly looking to hone, if you like, because we know that in some part of our lives, there's going to be a level of disruption going on. And so these are skills that are going to serve us well throughout life. It's not something that we kind of tick off and go, okay, that's the anti-fragile stuff done. We are continually on a journey, and an intentional journey is my invitation and my provocation for people is to say, no, this is something that we work on, and it's a lifelong journey, because the type of challenges and uncertainty that we'll encounter over the course of our career or our life will change. The flavor and nature of it will change.
Yeah, the one thing I must say, I always tell people the only thing one can count on in life is change, because nothing ever stays the same. You know, there's this constant evolution and revolving. And so it's good to have these checks and balances in place and see how adaptable are you to that constant of change. So if one then is resilient and you've built anti-fragility into your business, does that mean that you can't be vulnerable?
Well, this is interesting.
Is there an intersection between the three?
There is, because, you know, often when you come across the word anti-fragile, it sounds like we're saying that fragile is bad. Now, certainly in terms of our levels of thriving and in terms of us being able to feel well and to do well, to perform well in our work and in our lives, and to lead well, whether that's in a formal leadership role or just in informally in leading ourselves or leading our family or taking a leadership role in our communities. But if we're to feel well, do well, and lead well, it doesn't. Being fragile doesn't serve us to do that. Playing small and staying safe and feeling overwhelmed, it's not a comfortable place to be. It doesn't mean we're performing at our best. And we're certainly not able to lean into our leadership capacity from that space. But it doesn't mean that we're not vulnerable. It doesn't mean that we don't embrace emotions, and it doesn't mean that we don't experience struggle. So it's not that idea of robustness where we just kind of stand like a lighthouse and get hit by the elements. Anti-fragility isn't a solo endeavor. Often the way that we can help ourselves become anti-fragile is by actually recognizing our boundaries and recognizing when we need to reach out for support. And that can take courage, and it can take an acknowledgement that, hey, I'm vulnerable here. I need some help, or I need to get some knowledge, or I need to ask for different perspectives. So in the original work that Taleb wrote, he writes that collectives in economic terms are more anti-fragile than a solopreneur, if you like. And you can understand why, because the learning that we get from a collective experience is far greater. And that means that we can be more anti-fragile. There's more possibility for us to improve through whatever the uncertainty or disruption is in our environment. So vulnerability in terms of recognizing, when do I need support? When is the confidence or the motivation that I'm trying to draw for myself in the face of this disruption just not going to be enough to get me through, because I either need to get some specialist knowledge, or I need some emotional support, or I need to get some other perspectives in here in order to help this situation, help me be anti-fragile in this situation. So certainly vulnerability and recognizing when to reach out is an important part of the becoming anti-fragile journey. Another thing I get asked often is, does it mean we're strong? And again, it's not that strong in the sense of, that we might traditionally think means that we stand firm and we're not able to move. It's kind of the strength of a ballerina, where we're flexible and we're agile, and yes, we're strong, but it's strong with an ability to move and to change and adapt. So it's not about being denying vulnerability. It's not about being strong in the traditional sense. It's not about denying emotions, because actually emotions are a really powerful information source for us. We're wired to be emotions, and if we can, I had a very interesting conversation with a group of senior leaders just last week. I was mentoring them, and they were telling me how they like to take emotions out of the conversation. It makes it a much clearer and cleaner conversation. And I encourage them to really reframe how they think about emotions. If emotions are information rather than something to be taken out of the conversation, how is it that we can invite them in a constructive way and use them to inform the nature of the conversation? What do we need to be talking about, and how is it that as leaders and individuals we can tune into what we're feeling and understand that is information for us in terms of knowing what's going to take us forward in the most constructive way possible. So it's an interesting word, and it throws up questions in terms of, well, does that mean we're not allowed to be fragile, and we're not allowed to be vulnerable, and we've got to be strong all the time? And there's more nuance to it than that.
So the one thing people always ask is, there's theory and there's theory and there's theory, but how can this practically help me in my business now?
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly in the book, I've developed 6 principles, and I've used the acronym ROBUST to kind of, our brains love acronyms because it helps us remember things. So there are 6 principles, and the reason I've developed principles is because when we're working and living in a disruptive and uncertain context, rules really don't work. So if I were to say, here's 10 rules to stick by to help you become anti-fragile, if something changes in the environment, maybe most of those rules would need to be thrown out the window because they're just not relevant anymore. So the 6 robust principles, firstly, it speaks to neuroscience. So understanding that the R of the robust principles is about recruiting your brain. So how is it that we can understand a little bit about neuroscience, a little bit about the fact that actually our brains are wired to keep us safe? So when we start feeling that fear response, when we start feeling that feeling of overwhelm, it's perfectly natural, and it's our brain doing its main job in life, which is to keep us safe. Now, we can manage that in a constructive way by asking questions around, what can I control here? What can't I control? What can I influence? And that helps us engage a part of the brain that is about rational thought and reasoning. And it means that we don't get triggered and into this kind of quite hysterical thinking, which can make us fragile because we're not kind of being clear in what constructive action looks like in this situation. So the R is recruit the brain. The O stands for operate in reality. And this really, if the R is about neuroscience, then the O is about psychology. It's about how do we create these stories in our heads to try and make sense of all the information, all the input that we're receiving. And again, I use questions here because questions are wonderfully adaptive. So no matter what's going on, you can use these questions to peel away the layers of the onion of the story you might be telling yourself and actually get to the reality of what's going on here. And the questions that I encourage people to use are, what do I absolutely know for sure? What do I know is true? Can I absolutely know that that is true? And just a little side note here, there's very little in life that we can absolutely know is true. And then who am I as I hold on to that story, and who am I as I let go of that story, and which one serves me better? So we're just stripping away the sense-making stories that sometimes can be unhelpful for us. So that's the R and the O. The B helps us build strength. So inquiring, thinking about, when have I been at my best? What do I feel proud of? What am I doing at those moments? So that as we're engaging with disruption, challenge, and change, we're actually using the skills and the tools and the way our brain is naturally wired, because that's what strengths are. They're inherent in the way that our brains are wired. And we're using those, and this comes into that intentionality. We're using them intentionally so that we can be at our best as we engage with the uncertainty. So that's the R, the O, and the B. I'm okay. I'll keep going.
Thanks.
So
carry on.
Lovely. So the U stands for use intelligent risk. And this speaks to the first principle, which is about the brain wanting to keep us safe. But that can help make us play small and stay safe. And yet actually in environments where we've got lots of uncertainty and disruption going on, playing safe and staying small is not really going to help us get most upside or opportunity from that kind of environment. So here I teach something that's called the learning loop. And this helps us experiment. So it's also what I call the tinkering mentality. If any of you have children and have watched any of the Tinkerbell movies from Disney, you'll know that the Tinker Fairies are fairies that take things and reuse them in some way. And so this is about, how can I reuse my experience and think about, okay, what went well with that experience? Where did I struggle? And what can I learn forward from that? And then make little iterations and adaptations and keep testing so that you build this muscle around test and learn mentality.
I like that, concept of learning forward.
Yes.
Because I really like that.
And what that means is we also become more comfortable when things don't go perfectly. And, that's what we have to do, because in this disruptive and uncertain environment, if we don't create the psychological safety for ourselves and others to actually be innovative and creative, then again, we're going to play small, stay safe. And that's one of the things that can make us fragile. So that's the U, use intelligent risk. Seek collective wisdom is the S. And this speaks to what we were talking about before, that actually playing a solo game can be something that makes you really fragile. And seeking collective wisdom in terms of experience and perspectives means that actually we have options available to us that are far more likely to give us benefit as the situation and the challenges and the complexity changes and moves. So seeking collective wisdom is about bringing in diverse perspectives that may be completely opposite to your own and understanding the value in those, and also recognizing the challenge that comes with that, because often we attach ourselves to our ideas, but then it's actually about separating ego and putting in the room or in the conversation, how is this a useful thing for us to be discussing? How is it that our differences actually make the solution or the conversation stronger? So that's the C, collective wisdom. So that's the S of robust. And the final one, the T, stands for tackle the infinite game. And what this speaks to is it speaks to meaning and purpose as a source of motivation. And it speaks to removing short-term and reactive types of leadership and conversations and thinking. And tackling the infinite game means, what happens if I actually think about a legacy? What happens if we think about a long-term horizon in terms of how we prioritize our work and how we understand what is meaningful work? So, and again, because short-termism can make us fragile. So thinking about more of the long-term horizon can help us become more anti-fragile. So those are the 6 principles.
That is amazing. I think they are sort of, very practical principles that can be instituted. And do you expand on that? So your book is called Becoming Antifragile, Learning to Thrive Through Disruption, Challenge, and Change. And all of that, I assume, is in the book.
Yes, it is. So I go through the 6 principles, and for each principle, I suggest kind of 3 questions or sets of questions that you can use to help bring that principle to life. And then we apply them through energy, attitude, and mindset. So what does it look like for us to create anti-fragile energy for ourselves? What does it look like when we adopt anti-fragile mindsets and actually kind of filter information and make decisions through this anti-fragile lens? And what does it mean for us to have an anti-fragile mindset, where the way that we actually view the world, again, is through this becoming anti-fragile perspective. So we then apply the robust principles to energy, attitude, and mindset. And again, there are practical tips and strategies for how you can put that into action in the book.
Well, I was going to ask you that question next. Are there specific steps or guidelines that leaders can take themselves or implement for their teams to help them become anti-fragile?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I would recommend is I've developed a survey called the Antifragile Survey. And this is the example of the report that you get. It takes less than 10 minutes. It's a free survey, and you can complete it at www.theantifragilesurvey.com. Now, if you go there, this will give you kind of the first steps in your anti-fragile journey. It'll give you an overview of the continuum that I've talked about this evening. It will give you a sense of which of the robust principles are you using the most. So where have you got a strength that you can leverage from, and which one are you using the least? So where is there real opportunity for you to bring something else that will help you become anti-fragile? And then it also looks at what are your levels of anti-fragile energy, attitude, and mindsets. And depending on your results there, it suggests some actions that you can take to improve or develop all of those 3. So a tip for energy, a tip for attitude, and a tip for mindsets. And then it also talks about how is it that you can move from becoming to being, so that actually it stops being something that sits outside and that we're kind of trying to do as a separate behavior, and it becomes actually part of who we are. It's part of how we show up in the world and the way that we see the world. So that's a light touch way to kind of get into anti-fragile. And then in the book, I go into much more depth in terms of what are the robust principles, how can you bring them to life and use them, whether it's for you or whether these are questions you're going to bring to life with your team. And then the energy, attitude, mindset piece again comes back to how is it that as a leader, I can first fill myself up, because I think it's really important that, leadership is hard work, and it takes energy, and it takes intentional kind of turning yourself on and into the role. And so we have to, it's what I call the oxygen mask principle. We have to put our own oxygen mask on first as leaders in order to be able to have the capacity to help others bring their best selves and draw that out of them. So at the moment I'm writing the next book, which is about anti-fragile teams, and that takes these ideas and invites leaders to bring it to life in terms of how they lead teams. But the principles, the robust principles, certainly go across individuals and teams. And there are ideas in this book that would be very easily transferred into a team environment.
Thank you so much. Those are very practical steps that companies and leaders can take now. Where can people find your book, Paige?
So it's available at Amazon, amazon.com, and there's a paperback and an ebook and an audiobook available there. And you can also get to it via my website, which is www.drpaigewilliams.com. And there's other information there about Antifragile and other free resources as well. So certainly encourage you to visit the site and have a look around there too.
Just a side question, how easy or difficult was it to publish during COVID?
It was, the actual publishing was easy. The promotion of the book certainly looked very different than I thought it would when I first started writing last year. But it's so timely. As I said, I started writing it in the middle of last year or researching it. And then as I sat down to write in the last week of January this year and everything started to unfold, I was like, okay, we need to get this out as soon as possible, which is why I've made as many resources as I can free, because I really feel this is a topic that's of service right now to help people understand how thriving and struggle often, in fact, go hand in hand. And we know there's plenty of struggle going on right now. And how is it that if we can engage and see that struggle through a slightly different lens, we can learn from it, and that can help us feel a sense of thriving even as we experience the struggle. And that's my hope for this book and all the resources that go with it, is to really help people see it doesn't remove the discomfort, but the learning that can come from this can be things that we're proud of as we move forward.
And I think that is, part of the lesson in this is that this may not be the last crisis we see. And so the principles that we can apply through becoming anti-fragile is not going to help us specifically only through COVID, but it's going to help prepare us for the next crisis.
Absolutely. You're so right, Brigetti, because as I was writing the book and researching it last year, I'd already called this the decade of disruption. We had a number of, it was almost like the perfect storm was brewing, not necessarily to produce COVID, but for this to be a decade where there were lots of tensions in big systems, whether it's economic systems or political systems, the influence of technology, the change in population dynamics and population distribution, the distribution of wealth in populations. All of these dynamics had been building for them to have some kind of significant shift in this decade. So it was always going to be a roller coaster ride. And I guess just 2020 has really set the tone for what I think will continue to be, for a number of different reasons, the decade of disruption. And so these principles, whether they're applied at the individual level or beyond that to teams and more broadly in organizations, they apply to human systems, whether, as I said, whether it's a human system of 1, of 5, of 10, of 10,000, the principles that are written in the book are about human psychology and physiology and neuroscience. So they are very much applicable at whatever level within a human system, which is essentially what organizations are.
Paige, thank you so much. This was very, very insightful. And I want to thank our viewers, whether you've watched us live or on the replay. If you want to know when we go live next time, please hit the like button. And on YouTube, please go ahead, hit the subscribe button. And we'll be back again for some more conversation with myself, Brigitte Limbanda. Paige, thank you so much and have a great day further. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Brigitte. It's been a joy. Thank you.
Hi everyone, hope that you are having a morning time, good morning South Africa and the rest of the world. It's my name